Alright, last time we talked a bit about images, and in fact we linked to an image so you could click on it and bring that image up on our page. This time we're going to talk about bringing those images into the site itself. Before we do that, I want to do something a little bit preliminary. I want to introduce the break tag, BR, and I want to do that for a reason you'll see in a minute. The break tag is a strange tag. What it does is it inserts a single return at the end of something. Remember that when we put returns in, they don't display. So I'm going to put in a quick another H2 down here for my address. Okay, so there's my address. If I save this real quick, file save, and then I look at it in a browser, not surprisingly, it's all one line here. So how do we make it do a new line? Well, we could put paragraph tags around this, but we really don't want to do that. I'll show you why. We'll put paragraph tags around both lines. But in fact, these aren't paragraphs. There really shouldn't be double spacing behind there. Again, it's not a matter of presentation. It's a matter of calling something a paragraph when it's not. This is clearly not a paragraph. This is an address. Now, the whole thing may be part of a paragraph. Right? This whole thing may be a paragraph, starting here and ending here. But this is really ought to be in two lines. So what we want here is for it to break. Now, it doesn't make sense for break to have anything inside of it. Right? It doesn't make sense to have a break and then a close break. What would you put inside of a break? A break is something that, by definition, happens at one point. So this is going to be a special kind of tag that we're going to call a self-closing tag. So rather, we can type it this way. It won't break anything if we do. No pun intended. But the better way to type it is this. What this means is the whole tag is closing itself. If I click here, see it has the end tag right there. It's all part of the same tag. So let's try that. Alright, so we have a break. It's best to avoid break when you can. It can be a crutch that can really mess things up. You definitely shouldn't have like chains of breaks together, but it's a good opportunity to talk about a self-closing tag, because now we need to talk about a more important self-closing tag, the image tag, because the image isn't going to have anything inside of it except for the image. And we'll see how that works in a minute. Before we do, I want to mention some things about images. We're trying to make a very clear distinction between images that are content and images that are presentation. So in a newspaper, really the masthead, if it's in some fancy type and maybe has some images in it and is line art, that is an image, but it wouldn't go here. It would go in the presentation layer, the CSS layer. On the other hand, if you had a photograph of a news event, or if you had an infographic describing something going on, or a chart of some sort, those are all things that are really content related, and so those do belong here. So images happen on both sides. They happen in the content layer and they happen in the presentation layer, and so it's important to keep those divided up. I also need to mention, at least briefly, the issue of file types. I'm assuming that you've already hit on questions of file types of GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs in another course or elsewhere, or when you're doing design issues. So I'm not going to go in much detail. I'm going to remind you that generally GIFs and PNGs are line art or images that have large spaces of a similar color. For GIFs, if they're usually limited in color to 256 colors. Photographs and complicated images tend to be JPEGs, but this is a lossy format. That is, it's not perfect. It doesn't display things perfectly. So if you're doing line art, it's a bad choice. So I'll leave it to you to choose between JPEG and GIF. Traditionally, we didn't use PNG just because there wasn't as much support for it. I do tend to use PNG on some of my sites now. There are still people out there using browsers that can't correctly handle PNGs, but it is a better format. PNGs are basically a replacement for GIF. They generally compress better, that is, they're smaller file sizes, which is important. And there's other advantages in terms of transparency to using PNGs. That said, there's nothing wrong with using GIFs at this point. but you should be aware that there may be a slow shift happening towards PNGs. All right, so how do we get these images in? You'll recall that in our folder we have the droid image right there, and up here we've linked to it. But rather than linking to it, I'm just going to get rid of that line entirely, and I'm going to put in a block that has an image. So the image uses the image tag, and the image tag is self-closing. This will show absolutely nothing because it doesn't know what sort of image we want to show. So we need to include a source, and in this case we're going to include the source as droid.jpg. That's a photograph, so it's a JPG, a JPEG. Let's try that. File save. Go back over to the browser and reload. Aha! It's dropped it right there, just the way it should. Now, there are a number of attributes that you not only should but must include. The must include is something called alt. The alt text is there, again, to make this page accessible. Some people turn images off. Sometimes the image just won't load because they're on a very slow connection. Or for people who are visually impaired and are using a screen reader that verbalizes what's on the screen, you need to have alt text. That is what will show up when the image isn't there or isn't displayable. This is something that you must have on each of your image tags. Optionally, you can also include the width. Remember that every attribute is something equals and then quotes. The width and the height of the image. Now, right down here you'll see, oh, you won't. This is in Vista, and it shows down here that it's 405 by 377. So we can put that in here. 405 by 377. Can the browser figure that out by itself? Obviously, it just did when it displayed it. This gives it a little bit of a hint. It's less and less imperative that you do this for browsers, but it does kind of help the display of the browser, especially if it's a slow load. It'll lay out the space a little bit better in some cases, and so it's a nice thing to do, but it's not as vital. Here we've used the local image. I want to encourage you, even though the book gives an example of doing it otherwise, it's really bad form to use http:// and grab an image from elsewhere out on the web. This is considered kind of bandwidth theft. If you're going to use an image and you have permission to use the image, make a copy on your own server and put a copy of the image in your own folder and reference it there. Just a bad idea to both rely on images out there on the web and to use other people's bandwidth to do it. There is an exception to that. For example, Flickr allows you to host images on Flickr and reference them. There's other examples that are designed specifically for doing things like that, but generally speaking, you want the copy to be local. I want to take a quick second here to say that in many cases when you're creating a full website, you wouldn't have, to go back to the folder, you wouldn't have the images and everything all jumped together here. You'd probably have a folder where you put all the images, and you might call that images. That makes sense. So we're going to put that in there. So now we have the index file, and then we have a folder called images. Let's go back and see what happens when we refresh. Okay, it says, uh-oh, there's a problem. It was not able to display this. Okay, and the reason for that is that it's no longer at that location. So we need to go back and take a look here. It's not at that location because it's not in the same folder, not in the same directory. So we're going to put images in there. So this is a link saying look in the images directory / and then look for this file name in that directory. And that's a much more common way to do it. So we'll go ahead and make sure that that's still working. Ta-da! And so now we have our first self-closing tag, the one that we'll use most frequently, image. And we've talked a little bit about how to get those images, content-based images, into your site. All right, I'll see you next time when we get into a little bit more structure.